Daniel never thought a simple patrol would change his life forever. He was an ordinary soldier, stationed far from Earth, on the edge of a system that most people back home had never even heard of. His job was not glamorous. He and his small team were assigned to scan empty sectors of space looking for unusual signals or signs of pirates. It was usually dull work, hours of silence, broken only by the occasional static on the radio. But on this day, something different appeared on his radar. At first, Daniel thought it was another false signal. The screen flashed faintly, showing strange energy patterns that didn't match anything familiar. He adjusted the scanner, expecting it to vanish. But instead, the signal grew stronger, as if it was calling for help. He hesitated. The safe thing would be to log the reading and move on. But something about it tugged at him. It didn't feel random, it felt desperate. Daniel decided to investigate. He flew his small patrol craft toward the source, his heart beating faster with each passing second. Soon, through the dusty light of the stars, he saw it, a shipwreck drifting in space. The hull was scorched, the metal torn as if it had been attacked. Strange markings glowed faintly on the surface, symbols he didn't recognize. This wasn't human technology, it was alien. His training told him to call for backup, but when he looked closer, he saw movement. Through a cracked window, faint silhouettes struggled. Someone was alive inside. Daniel didn't stop to think further. He guided his ship alongside the wreck and locked it in place. With his suit on, he crossed the gap, forcing open the emergency hatch. The air inside was thin, almost gone. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the ruined hallways. Daniel's boots clanged against the floor as he moved quickly, his visor scanning for life signs. The device on his wrist beeped, pointing him deeper into the ship. When he turned the corner, he froze. There, lying against a collapsed wall, were figures unlike any he had seen before. Tall, elegant beings with silver-toned skin and glowing eyes. They looked fragile in their current state, their breaths shallow, their bodies weak. Some were already unconscious, but in the center of them all was someone different. She was smaller than the rest, her features younger, her robes richer in detail. Her crown-like headpiece had fallen to the ground, and her hands trembled as she tried to lift it. Daniel didn't understand their language, but he understood enough. She was important. She was the princess. Daniel knelt quickly, checking her breathing. Her mask, a strange device over her mouth, was broken. The air here was too thin for her species. Without a working device, she wouldn't survive long. His mind raced. He didn't know alien technology, but he knew enough about engineering. Carefully, he pulled out his repair kit, adjusting the tubes and realigning the seals. His hands worked fast, almost without thought. The princess's eyes fluttered, watching him with fear and confusion. "Hold on," Daniel whispered, though she couldn't understand him. "I've got you." Finally, with a click, the device lit up again. A soft hiss of air filled the mask, and the princess gasped. Her breathing steadied, and her eyes widened with relief. Daniel didn't have time to feel proud. He lifted her gently, cradling her light frame in his arms. She was weak, but alive. The others still lay scattered across the floor. Daniel quickly signaled his ship's medical system to extend emergency pods. The automated stretchers floated in, and with great effort, he placed as many survivors as he could onto them. The princess, however, he carried himself. Back in his ship, alarms blared. His fuel was running low and communication was weak in this part of space. He knew he couldn't save everyone if he waited too long. Still, he refused to leave anyone behind. One by one, he secured them, setting the ship on course toward the nearest human station. The princess clung to his arm weakly as he adjusted her mask. Her glowing eyes met his. For a moment, Daniel felt something pass between them. Gratitude, trust, maybe even hope. He didn't need words to understand her silent plea. "Don't leave us." The journey back was tense. Daniel kept checking the medical systems, making sure the aliens were stable. He didn't know what kind of injuries they had or what their biology required, but he did everything he could. He adjusted oxygen levels, applied basic first aid where possible, and stayed, awake the entire time. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. Hours later, the stars outside shifted as his ship entered human-controlled space. The station's security team was shocked when he sent his request to dock. No one expected a soldier to arrive, with a group of alien survivors, much less a royal figure. As soon as they landed, medical teams rushed in. Daniel stepped aside, letting them work, but the princess wouldn't let go of his hand. Even as the doctors surrounded her, she held on tightly, her glowing eyes following him wherever he moved. When they finally guided her away, her fingers slipped slowly from his as if she feared losing him. Daniel stood there, his uniform torn, his hands still trembling from the effort. He had only done what any decent human would do. He saw lives in danger and saved them. But deep inside he felt a strange sense that this was only the beginning. He didn't know who these aliens were, or what his actions meant to them. All he knew was that a young princess had survived because he refused to walk away. And somewhere far across the stars, news of what he had done was already spreading. Daniel had barely rested when the call came. He was sitting in the small quarters assigned to him on the station, staring out at the stars through the narrow window. The events of the last day still played in his mind like a dream. He could still see the princess's faint smile when the mask had started working, still feel her grip on his arm when she refused to let him go. He had saved people before, but this was different. These were not fellow soldiers or colonists. They were aliens, beings humanity barely understood, and one of them was no ordinary figure. She was royalty. He had thought his part in the story was over. He had delivered the survivors to the medical teams. He had given his report to the officers. He had done his duty. But then the message came. Station officer appeared at his door, his face pale with nervousness. "Private Daniel," he said formally. "You've been summoned. By them." He didn't need to explain who them meant. Daniel knew instantly. The aliens. The royal family. His stomach tightened. He followed the officer through long corridors until they reached a section of the station now guarded by both humans and tall alien warriors. Their armor gleamed under the lights, and their strange eyes watched every movement with sharp suspicion. Daniel had never been so aware of his own footsteps. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with authority. The chamber had been reshaped to fit the needs of the alien guests. Drapes of silver-blue cloth hung from the walls, and symbols shimmered faintly, glowing like stars. At the far end, seated on a raised platform, was the queen herself. Daniel had imagined what a queen might look like. He thought of Earth's old history, of crowns and jewels. But the figure before him was unlike anything he could have expected. She was tall, her skin marked with faint, glowing patterns that shifted with her breathing. Her robes flowed like liquid light, and her eyes held a weight that made Daniel lower his gaze without being told. This was not a leader who needed to raise her voice to command respect. Her presence alone was enough. Beside her stood the princess, now recovered, though still looking fragile. Her mask was gone, replaced by a lighter device hidden beneath her robes. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw Daniel. She took a step forward, but one of the alien guards gently stopped her, reminding her of the formality of the moment. Daniel knelt without thinking, unsure if that was the right gesture but hoping it showed respect. He expected silence, maybe judgment. Instead, the queen's voice filled the chamber, deep and steady, though he couldn't understand the words. Thankfully, a translator stood nearby, repeating her message in human language. "You saved my daughter," the queen said. "You risked your life for her when you had no reason to." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? That it was just his job? That he couldn't have walked away? He finally managed. "I only did what anyone should have done." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing the truth in his words. The princess stepped forward this time, breaking the formality. Her voice was soft yet filled with urgency as she spoke to her mother in their own tongue. The translator struggled to keep up, but Daniel caught enough. She was telling the story, how he had repaired her mask, how he carried her, how he refused to leave the others behind. Every detail was spoken with a kind of admiration Daniel wasn't used to hearing. When the princess finished, the queen was silent for a long moment. The chamber felt colder. Daniel could feel the eyes of every guard, every court member watching, waiting to see what judgment would fall upon the human soldier. Finally, the queen rose from her seat. She walked slowly toward him, her robes trailing across the floor like a river of light. Daniel forced himself not to move, though every instinct screamed at him to stand straighter, to breathe deeper. When she stopped before him, her height and presence made him feel small, almost childlike. She studied him closely, her gaze sharp but not cruel. Then, without warning, she lifted her hand. For a moment, Daniel thought she might strike him. Instead, she placed her palm gently on his shoulder. Courage. The translator repeated her words softly. Loyalty. These are rare. You have them. Both, the chamber murmured. The alien guard shifted, exchanging glances. To hear praise from the queen was rare, Daniel realized. This wasn't something handed out lightly. But then her tone changed. Her eyes hardened slightly, and the translator's voice followed with weight. Still, words and one action are not enough. I must see who you truly are. I must test the heart of the one who saved my blood. Daniel felt his chest tighten. A test? He had no idea what that meant, but from the way the aliens reacted, it was not something simple. The princess spoke quickly, her voice filled with protest. But the queen silenced her with a single look. The queen turned back to Daniel. You will stay among us. You will prove yourself not only to me but to my people. Then I will decide what place you deserve. The translator hesitated, then added softly, This is not a request. It is a command. Daniel bowed his head, trying to hide the storm inside him. He had come here expecting a simple thank you, maybe even dismissal. Instead, he found himself bound to something far larger, something he didn't fully understand. He wasn't sure if he should feel honored or afraid. As the queen returned to her throne, the princess finally managed to break free of the guards. She rushed to Daniel's side and whispered quickly, her eyes bright with both relief and worry. The translator didn't need to speak. Daniel understood her tone, her expression. She was saying, You are not alone. I will stand with you. And, in that moment, Daniel realized the truth. Whatever tests lay ahead, whatever challenges the queen had in mind, his life would never be the same. He had stepped into a world of power, tradition, and unshakable bonds. The fate of one act of kindness was no longer his alone. It had tied him forever to the destiny of a royal family on the other side of the stars. The next morning came too soon for Daniel. He had barely slept, his mind spinning with the queen's words. She had said he would be tested, and though no details had been given, the weight of it pressed heavily on him. He was just a soldier, not a diplomat, not a leader. Why would a queen, powerful and proud, care about proving him? Yet deep down, Daniel already knew the answer. To her people, saving the princess was more than luck. It was a bond. And bonds in her culture were never taken lightly. When the guards came for him, their armor glinted under the station's lights. They didn't speak, only gestured for him to follow. The princess was there too, waiting in the ceremonial hall. She smiled at him nervously, but her eyes carried worry. She knew what was coming, even if Daniel didn't. The queen stood before her court, her expression unreadable. Beside her, advisors whispered in hushed tones, their glowing symbols flickering across their robes. When Daniel was brought forward, the queen raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent. The human showed courage once, the translator announced, but a single act cannot define a soul. Today he will face 3 trials, not of strength alone, but of spirit. Only then will we see if his place among us is deserved. Daniel swallowed hard, but nodded. He had no choice. The guards led him to a smaller chamber where the first trial awaited. The room was dim, filled with strange structures that resembled jagged stone. Suddenly, without warning, shadows moved. Figures leapt from the darkness, armed and fierce. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He thought it was a real ambush, but as the light caught their faces, he saw they were not enemies. They were soldiers of the Queen, playing the part of attackers. This was the trial. Daniel drew no weapon. He had learned long ago that fighting was not always the answer. Instead, he moved quickly, shielding the princess who had been placed at the center of the room as part of the test. He pushed her behind cover, using his own body as a barrier when the soldiers charged. He didn't strike back with violence but with clever moves, redirecting their momentum, dodging blows, and refusing to abandon his post. Every time they tried to reach the princess, Daniel was there, standing firm like a wall. When the trial ended, the soldiers stepped back and saluted, their expressions respectful. The princess rushed to Daniel, gratitude written across her face. Watching from above, the Queen's eyes softened for just a moment. He had passed the first trial, not by defeating enemies, but by protecting life without hesitation. The second trial came later that day. This time, Daniel was led into a grand hall filled with both humans and aliens. A disagreement had been staged between two groups, an argument over trade routes and rights. Daniel was given no instructions except that he must choose how to handle it. He listened carefully as both sides shouted, their voices rising with anger. He didn't know their culture well, didn't understand all the traditions they cited, but he knew people. He knew what fear and pride sounded like. Instead of taking a side, Daniel spoke calmly, urging them to see one another's needs. He reminded them of the dangers outside their alliance, the enemies that lurked in the void, ready to strike if they remained divided. His words were simple, even awkward compared to the elegance of alien speech, but they carried honesty. Slowly, the anger softened. The groups agreed to pause their dispute and consider compromise. When the Queen's advisors reported this outcome to her, she gave a small nod. It wasn't perfect, but it showed Daniel's willingness to seek peace over power. The final trial was the most difficult. That evening, Daniel was taken to a quiet chamber, where no soldiers or advisors stood, only the Queen herself, the princess, and a single artifact placed upon a pedestal. It was a small crystal, glowing with inner light. The translator explained in a hushed tone. This crystal is a symbol of command. To hold it is to be offered influence among our people. Many who take it are changed by the desire for authority. If you wish, you may claim it. If you refuse, you walk away with nothing. Daniel stared at it. The crystal pulsed softly, almost alive, tempting in its beauty. He thought about what it could mean. Power, a voice in an alien empire, a chance to shape history. For a soldier, who had lived most of his life following orders, it was overwhelming. But then he looked at the princess, her eyes watching him with hope, and at the Queen, her expression sharp and waiting. He realized this was not about power at all. It was about choice. They wanted to see what was in his heart. Slowly, Daniel stepped forward. He reached out his hand, then paused. He shook his head and stepped back. I didn't save her for reward, he said quietly. I did it because it was the right thing. I don't need this. The translator's voice echoed his words. The chamber fell silent. For a long moment, the Queen said nothing. Then at last, she rose. Her robes shimmered as she descended the steps. She walked to Daniel and looked into his eyes, her gaze piercing, yet no longer cold. She lifted the crystal herself, holding it up for the court to see, and then placed it back on the pedestal, untouched. The human has chosen with wisdom. The translator spoke her words, though even without translation, Daniel understood. The Queen extended her hand, a rare gesture of respect. He has proven loyalty, fairness, and humility. He has passed. The princess smiled with joy, relief flooding her features. Daniel let out a slow breath, the tension in his body finally loosening. The trials were over. He hadn't known what to expect, but somehow he had done enough. That night, as he sat quietly, the princess visited him. She told him, through halting translation, that her people had begun to speak of him with admiration. The guards who once looked at him with suspicion now bowed slightly when he passed. The court, which had whispered doubts, now spoke of courage. Daniel didn't feel like a hero. He still saw himself as just a man who did what was right. But in the eyes of the Queen and her people, he was something more. He was no longer just a soldier from Earth. He was a figure who had proven himself in trials meant for leaders, not common men. And though he did not yet realize it, these trials were not simply to test him. They were the first steps towards something greater, a bond that would change his life and theirs forever. Daniel was not sure how to act the next day. The trials had ended, but the memory of them was still sharp in his mind. He had expected to feel relief, maybe even pride, but what he felt was something else entirely. He felt changed. The way the aliens looked at him now was different. Their stares no longer carried suspicion or doubt. Instead, they carried respect. Some even bowed their heads slightly as he passed, a gesture he had seen them give only to their own leaders. He tried to remain humble. After all, he had not gone through the trials to impress anyone. He had only followed his heart, doing what seemed right in each moment. Still, he could not deny that things were different now. He was no longer just an outsider who happened to save the princess. He was someone they had accepted, at least in part, into their world. The Queen summoned him again, though this time the atmosphere was less formal. The great hall was still majestic, with silver drapes and glowing symbols. But there was no test waiting. Instead, the Queen stood with the princess at her side, both of them looking at him with an air of quiet decision. "You have passed," the translator repeated the Queen's words. "By our tradition, saving the heir of the throne binds you to our family. You are no longer only a guest. From this day you are kin." Daniel froze. Kin? He didn't know if he had heard correctly. The princess's face lit up with relief and joy. She stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, and bowed slightly to him, a gesture not of royalty but of closeness. The Queen explained further, her voice steady. "In our culture, those who save blood become blood. You are now one of us. Not as a servant, not as an outsider, but as family." The chamber filled with murmurs from the alien court. Some were surprised, others nodded in approval. For them, the words of the Queen were final, and tradition was sacred. Daniel stood in shock. He had come here expecting nothing more than to fulfill his duty as a soldier. Now, he was being told he was part of an alien royal household. The Queen stepped down from her throne and approached him. Her presence was powerful, yet there was warmth in her gaze now. She lifted her hand and placed it gently over his chest, right where his heart beat. "Family," she said herself without waiting for the translator. It was the first human word Daniel had ever heard her speak. The sound of it echoed in his mind. The princess came closer, her eyes shining. She whispered, softly through the translator, "You are my brother now, not by blood but by bond." Daniel didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. He simply nodded, bowing his head in respect, though inside he felt something he could not describe. Belonging. For the first time in years, perhaps in his entire life, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere, not because of his uniform or orders, but because of who he was. From that day forward, his life changed. He was given chambers within the royal quarters, where the princess often visited him to talk and share stories of her people. She taught him their customs, their history, their ways of seeing the universe. In turn, he told her about Earth, about oceans and forests, about music and laughter. She listened with fascination, her eyes wide as if each word was a treasure. Court members who once whispered behind his back now treated him with respect. Guards who once blocked his way now saluted him. He was invited to meals where alien dishes glowed softly in bowls, where laughter echoed in strange but pleasant tones. Slowly, Daniel became more than just a human in their palace. He became family. Yet with this new place came responsibility. The Queen reminded him often that being family was not only an honor but a duty. "To be one of us means to carry our burdens as your own," she told him. "You must stand with us in times of peace and in times of trial." Daniel nodded each time. though he knew it would not be easy. He was still learning, still adjusting, but he felt ready. For the princess, for the queen, for this family that had accepted him, he would stand firm. One evening, as he sat with the princess in the royal garden, the stars shining above, she turned to him and smiled. "When I thought I was dying, I felt fear. But then I saw you, a stranger, risking yourself for me. That day you became my brother. Nothing can change that now." Daniel looked at her, the sincerity in her words sinking deep into his heart. He had never had a sister, but now, across the stars, he had gained one. And with her, he had gained something more: purpose, belonging, and a family that crossed the boundaries of worlds. Life as part of the royal household was not simple. Every day brought new challenges, new lessons. Daniel was no longer only a soldier carrying out orders. He was a figure of unity, a living bridge between two species. The queen often introduced him as her human son, and though the words felt strange at first, they soon became natural. The people began to see him not as an outsider, but as proof that trust between species was possible. The princess, who once clung to life in his arms, now walked proudly beside him. They shared laughter, stories, and responsibilities. She often teased him about how serious he looked during ceremonies, reminding him to smile. In turn, he reminded her to be careful when wandering the palace gardens alone, a habit she had not abandoned. Together they became inseparable, like true siblings. The queen, though still regal and commanding, showed a different side when speaking to Daniel. She offered advice, told him stories of their ancestors, and guided him through the responsibilities that came with being family. She was strict at times, but Daniel saw the pride in her eyes. He realized she was not only a queen to him now, she was like a mother. Word of Daniel's bond with the royal family spread far beyond the palace walls. Other human colonies heard of the story and were stunned. Diplomats spoke of peace talks, inspired by the idea that if a single human could be welcomed into the heart of an alien empire, perhaps entire nations could find common ground. Daniel never sought fame, but he could not ignore the impact his actions had. Everywhere he went, people, both human and alien, looked at him with admiration. Children followed him in the streets, trying to mimic his stance. Elders nodded at him, their voices filled with respect. He became a symbol, not just of bravery, but of kindness. Yet he never forgot the beginning. He never forgot the broken ship, the weak breath of the princess, the desperate hope in her eyes. That memory guided him always, reminding him why he had acted in the first place. It wasn't for glory or reward. It was because it was right. Years later, Daniel stood on a balcony of the alien palace, looking out at the city glowing beneath the twin moons. The princess stood beside him, her crown shining as she prepared to take on greater responsibilities. The queen, older now, still carried herself with dignity, her hand resting on Daniel's shoulder as she spoke of the future. "You were once a stranger to us," she said. "Now you are my son. Never forget that family is not only born, it is chosen, it is proven. You proved yourself when you saved her. You proved yourself again when you stood through trials. And now you prove yourself each day by remaining true." Daniel bowed his head, emotion tightening his chest. He had found a home where he never expected one. He had gained a sister, a mother, and a family not bound by blood but by choice, by courage, by loyalty. And as he looked at the stars stretching endlessly across the dark sky, he felt certain of one thing: the bond they had built would last longer than lifetimes. It would shine as brightly as the stars themselves, a reminder that kindness could bridge any distance, even between worlds.